Hello, everybody. I'll wait till it... Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And welcome to today's Knowledge Connection. Clearly, we have many, many people who are interested in mental health and on resiliency. So thank you very much for attending this afternoon session. My name's Nancy Searl, and I'm a collaborative practice leader and pleased to be a co-lead with my co-lead Heidi Schwellnus and our family co-lead Sam Pizzulo on the Child and Youth Mental Health Initiative. And we're also here and very pleased to have Dr. Gillian King, who's a distinguished senior scientist with Bloorview Research Institute, to share her work on resiliency. So Heidi and I are going to begin and just give you some background about the Child and Youth Mental Health Initiative here at Holland Bloorview, and I'm going to pass it over to my co-lead.
All right. So we thought we'd start today just by outlining what we hope you'll get out of this session today. So as Nancy mentioned, we'll give you a bit of an overview of mental health at Holland Bloorview. We have a very short little video that I think it is the epitome of why mental health is imperative for us to be looking at here. We'll provide an overview of the Child and Youth Mental Health Initiative. We'll distinguish it from the others that are going on in the building at the same time. We'll give you a little bit of an update on what the current work that we're doing is involving the different groups working on the Child and Youth Mental Health Initiative. We will touch very briefly on resiliency as it's in one of our key definitions for mental health, and then we'll turn the podium over to Gillian, and she'll share with you her theory, research, and current work that she's doing on resiliency. Both of us will ask for some feedback and questions, so this is participation part of the thing, and then we'll give you a bit of information on what we're moving forward. So you go that side, I'll go this side.
Change position. So to frame today's discussion, we wanted to begin with a really short video that we think really sort of embodies our view of mental health at Holland Bloorview, and that is that mental health is equally as important as a child's physical health. So we just wanted to show you, and here again is I think many of you know our vision, but it is about enabling a child's healthy mind, body, and spirit. So just have a look at this video to get started.
Promoting a child's mental health is a really key, important part of promoting their overall health and well-being. A child's mental health affects how they interact with the world, how they see themselves in the world, and ultimately also affects their physical health as well. So when caring for a child, it's important to not only nurture and look after their physical health, but also to look after their mental health as well.
You got to start with how they think about themselves. And so working on a child's mental health, and in particular, if your child's not feeling happy, or they feel a bit downtrodden, they feel not confident about themselves, or they have significant anxiety issues, they're not going to take good care of themselves. The environment, such as having people to talk to. So if you open a dialogue with your child and really encourage them to express their feelings about what they're thinking, about how they feel when something happens to them, either good or bad, they feel they can open up to you, and that provides an exceptional environment for them to develop their mental health.
No, it's not working. We'll do this one. Oh, there we go. So as many of you know, and as Heidi alluded to at the beginning, we do have an overarching strategy at Holland Bloorview for mental health. There are three streams, as you can see: the Employee Mental Health, Child and Youth Mental Health Initiative, and the Care for the Caregiver. While we'll be talking about the Child and Youth Mental Health Initiative today, I wanted to bring your attention to the definition for the overarching mental health initiative at Holland Bloorview, and that is, in alignment with our organizational values, Holland Bloorview supports and promotes the mental health of children, youth, families, students, volunteers, and staff. We do this by creating space to discuss and address mental health through education, programs, partnership, and authentic engagement. And there we go. So as When we first embarked on looking at the area of mental health, we realized that it was a relatively unfamiliar territory to us at Holland Bloorview. And we realized as well that there would be important, really preliminary discussions that were required in advance of launching a strategy. So we used a think tank methodology to assist us with key visioning and directions. As you may know, a think tank is a group of people, either experts or those with a common or vested interest in a subject, who are gathered by an organization in order to consider an issue, a problem, or a goal, and try and work out ways to solve them. For us, this important work that the think tank was charged with was first to establish a definition, a vision, and a scope for the initiative. The think tank was comprised of key stakeholders, both internally and externally, and the think tank contributed and advised on the development of the definition, scope, and vision. But it's important to note that each of these was vetted through practice councils, family advisory committee, professional advisory committee, program and services committee, to name but a few. It was a traveling roadshow that lasted for about a year. So we arrived at the following. The definition, and many of you have heard this, but I think it's important as we frame our discussion today. Mental health is essential for a child's overall well-being. Mental health enables resiliency and coping with life's experiences. It encompasses a capacity to think, feel, and respond in a manner that optimizes potential and supports belonging and participation now and in the future. And of course, our vision, one more time, is enabling a child's healthy mind, body, and spirit, a Holland Bloorview initiative for mental health. And lastly, our scope, which is, we will realize our obligation to enable a child's healthy mind, body, and spirit. We will recognize our responsibility to address mental health as it pertains to the child and accordingly to the family. And this initiative will be hospital-wide.
All right, so Nancy touched on a few of these activities. We wanted just to give you a bit of a timeline of what has happened and what we're still working towards. So Nancy touched on the think tank. One of the things that we were involved in at the same time as the think tank is we joined what is called a healthcare partnership table, which is part of the Moving on Mental Health initiative across Ontario, and this one is specific in Toronto. So we were invited to join that partnership table, in which a lot of community mental health agencies sit at, as well as there's a pediatrician for frontline service providers. Psychiatry is present. So it's trying to figure out how to rearrange and reorganize some of the mental health services to streamline their process. And that is something that Nancy and I are continuing to be part of. Nancy mentioned practice councils. One of the things we also did along the way is we surveyed staff regarding their comfort and their knowledge about mental health, and that survey went out last fall. We had about 85 respondents to that survey, and two of the key things that came out of that survey is that staff felt that over 70% of their clients and families were dealing with some sort of mental health challenge, but only 20% of them felt that they had the knowledge, skills to actually address that and open that box. So hence the mental health initiative that we are still continuing to develop and to lead. We held a launch day, which I think some of you were attending, in which we had two keynote speakers. We had Dr. Peter Satmari here he works in 3 different places, CAMH, U of T, and Sick Kids. And we also had Michael Unger, who is a world-renowned researcher on resilience. And the afternoon of that workshop was small working groups where we discussed and targeted key enablers to move the initiative forward with a whole host of staff. We had over 70 clinicians, youth leaders, family members, and external service providers present at that day. Soon after that, Nancy and I were invited actually to present at the Oakers Conference, which, as most of you know, is the Ontario Treatment Centres Conference, to the executive leaders on what we had done as regarding our mental health strategy here, and to get feedback and to share information across the other organizations. So that was actually a very interesting afternoon that we spent downtown. And as we mentioned, we've moved forward, and our think tank ended, but what we did is we created what we call a leadership collective, which is a larger group of of senior directors, physicians. We have a research representative. We have youth on that, as well as family leaders. And that's sort of the guiding oversight for a lot of the work that we're doing. Part of their role is one of the enablers, which is creating partnerships to external community agencies. What we've done in that collective meeting is we brought in speakers from different agencies. We've had people from CAMH come to present on what services they have for mental health. We've had David O'Brien from Yorktown Family Services come, and we've had Toronto East Metro Services come, and we have a host of other speakers who are going to come to that. And we're developing partnerships as we go with other agencies. And we have working groups, which entail about 35 clinicians in total, as well as, again, youth and family leaders, to actually move specific things forward. And we'll talk a bit more about those as we go. And finally, what most of you will be aware of is we've instituted one for a fairly small, condensed aspect in mental health, which is suicide prevention and intervention. We've held 2 suicide assist training workshops, which are 2-day workshops to teach staff how to intervene when somebody is having suicidal thoughts. And we have suicide sort of more prevention, of which today they are currently training 5 staff to be able to present that workshop to our staff in-house as a train-the-trainer model. So they're learning that. And Greg will probably have to leave very quickly, as he's one of those people. So that's sort of what we've been doing to date. I mentioned the Child and Youth Committee membership that we have currently. The Leadership Collective, you can see the numbers of people that we have involved and who they are. But the one that's most important, I think, is the working groups. It shows the spread of clinicians and physicians and family leaders and youth that are helping to develop and work and move this initiative forward. At the bottom, you'll see the enablers. I mentioned that the Leadership Collective is targeting partnerships. And the working groups are doing the other 4 enablers, which is enhancing practice, developing resources, creating education and training, and enhancing awareness of mental health across the organization. So I spoke about those enablers, which are at the bottom. These enablers came partly out of the think tank and partly out of the launch day. So these were ground up from, have been in existence for quite a while. They are the 5 that we talked about. They really streamline and align nicely with our strategic plan under personalized pathways, as well as organization-wide learning and change. As I mentioned, for resources, I'll just highlight a few key ones that we're working on. Is enhancing the scope of practice that we have here. We've done a lot of work finding out what people are actually doing currently, maybe not labeling it as mental health, but actually doing it in their practice here. And we've shared resources with the working groups as well as with the Leadership Collective on what people are actually doing. We are working towards enhancing practice for signs and symptoms. We've been reviewing websites. Probably the easiest way to do that is to actually have key targeted websites that we can put as links for clinicians to look at rather than creating our own. As far as learning and change, I've spoken about the suicide prevention, and we're also working on resiliency and how to foster that in our clients and families. And Gillian will speak more to that as a foundational component. And awareness. I think this is increasing just as we are talking and working on this, is the awareness that mental health is part of child and youth that we have to see here. And then I mentioned partnerships is the Leadership Collective's job. And I'll let Nancy talk about the gray text, which is sort of where we hope to end up.
So the gray text is exactly where we hope to be once we bring this initiative to fruition. In terms of resources, ultimately we plan to identify a core team of experts in mental health. In terms of practice, we're looking at establishing personal pathways for children and youth to access mental health assistance. And in terms of organizational-wide learning and change, we're going to endeavor to increase staff ability to effectively address and respond to mental health. In terms of awareness, we plan to lead and model social change related to childhood disability and mental health. And lastly, in terms of our partnerships, we really will connect the system of pediatric rehabilitation with the mental health hubs that are beginning to form as we speak. So it's quite an exciting time. So just to remind you once more before I hand you over to Gillian, to just highlight again the place of that resiliency plays in our definition. And it's important to note that from the beginning of our work, the term first resilience, then resiliency bubbled up. And, terms were kind of bandied about. There were, should we put in rebound, recoil, bounce back, all of those terms. And then it was decided after many, many discussions that we really wanted to make resiliency explicit in our definition. And so with that in mind, it's our great pleasure to welcome Dr. Gillian King to share her exciting work. So I'm going to hand you over.
I have to raise the mic.
Don't know why.
Feeling very tall today. Okay, so I'm going to be talking today about building blocks of resiliency. And to set the stage, Kaylee is 17 years old, has a neurological disability, and will be completing high school in the coming year. She worries about what her future holds. With her service provider, she identifies a number of opportunities as having the potential to provide manageable, growth-enhancing experiences as they will involve a realistic degree of challenge for her. She feels these opportunities will provide her with experiences that will help her more fully appreciate her strengths, foster her capacity to marshal supports and resources, and enhance her sense of being able to adapt and do well in different life situations. So the colored bits are the adaptive self-capacities that I'll be talking about, reiterating as we go today. A little bit about my background in research on resiliency. I started my work in this area. We wrote a book, actually, that was published in 2003 with my colleagues from Thames Valley Children's Center, looking at turning points in resiliency in the lives of people with disabilities, primarily people with cerebral palsy. Then I was a co-investigator on a SSHRC grant where we looked at resiliency in the context of workplace adversity. We looked at fired executives, recent immigrants who were struggling to find employment, and U.S. military who were returning from Afghanistan who had negative cross-cultural experiences, and started to look at things like self-regulation and the processes that were involved. And recently, I'm working with Emily Nalder and others here. Emily's the principal investigator on a SSHRC grant, and it's taken me into a whole new realm for myself, which is in traumatic brain injury. So you see, I've been looking at resiliency in different populations, and now I'm bringing it back to pediatric rehab. And what I've been focusing on recently with my colleagues is how to think about it and how to measure it. So today, what is resiliency? What is the nature of resiliency for the disability context? I'm going to present a resiliency framework that comes out of an article that we've just had published, and then move into how can we measure resiliency. And I think this is really crucial for an organization like Holland, Bloorview, in fact, many organizations. If we, how do we know if our services and programs are supporting resiliency? We need a tool to do that, and I have a big background in tool development, and it's something I love to do. So what is it? I guess I should start with why the term resiliency. There's been a lot of literature over the years, resilience as a trait, something fixed within the individual. And my colleagues and I have wanted to start to look at it as a process, something that involves the interaction of the person with their environment, that is amenable to change. It's more like a state. And so that's why we use the term resiliency to differentiate our point of view. What is it? It involves adaptation to adversity. Adversity is essential to the whole construct. And it involves then a set of basic adaptational processes, including how we regulate our emotions and our thoughts and our behavior. Our connections with others, like social support, is huge. Our motivation for learning and interacting with our environment. It's a process. That's more the contemporary view of resilience. It's dynamic. It's positive adaptation in the context of significant adversity. So if you don't have the adversity, it's just coping. When you have significant adversity, then we're kicking to the resiliency mechanisms. And something else that's really been apparent in a lot of the research that's more recent is that it's highly contextualized. So What is considered an adaptive outcome depends on the context. So if we're looking at fired executives, it's getting a job. If it's recent immigrants looking for work, it's getting employment. And in the pediatric rehab realm, an adaptive outcome is something slightly different. So the perspective that we've been taking for resilience or for people with disabilities is this kind of transactional life course perspective, because I like to think really big and about change over time. So it's about resiliency in relation to other people and real life situations as they change. Because living with a chronic disability requires multiple ongoing adaptations and adjustments across the life course. Our work has been centered on the idea of adaptive self-capacities. It's a construct that I think has a lot of use for us, and it fits so nicely with what Nancy and Heidi were saying about the potential that a person can reach in the future. So it's optimizing that. It's not that everyone's going to get to the same endpoint, but who are we and what can we optimize through the supports around us and through our own learning. Involves the self in context. The construct is amenable to change, which is really important, and therefore really relevant to how we design services, how we evaluate services and practice. So back to Kaylee. She would like to feel confident in taking part in activities, capable of getting the supports and resources she needs to achieve her goals, able to deal with new and challenging situations, and also have a sense of hope for a positive future. These resiliency-related capacities will serve her well in whatever direction she chooses to take in life. This is the background for the researchers. Why did we focus on adaptive self-capacities? We are, again, guided by our transactional life course perspective. And if you look at the resilience and resiliency literature, they talk a lot about positive psychological constructs. So things like self-efficacy, optimism, hope, also assets that are within the person. So capacity to adapt or accept one's situation in life. And also Michael Unger's work, largely, the capacity to marshal or access support and resources. So it's like the idea of self-advocacy, getting out there, getting what you need to meet the goals that you have. Also the idea of optimistic future expectations, and we hear a lot from family members in particular about the importance of hope, and our services providing a sense of hope to people that there is a future ahead. And these constructs have been thought about in the literature as protective factors, so that protect an individual and help to facilitate their adaptation. Now I'm getting kind of technical, but this is part of the article that we have recently published. If you can see on the left-hand side, the pediatric rehab context. So I said it's contextualized. The ones we particularly focus on are activity performance, goal pursuit. All the services here pretty well do that. But we also then have services that look at transitions specifically, and future life is the additional context that this framework covers. Health-related adversities are triggered within these, they're related to these contexts, and the activity limitations and the functioning and participation restrictions are the ones in the International Classification of Functioning, the WHO World Health Organization. We're moving now up to transition issues, and this is something that's missing in the World Health Organization framework. And then the idea of future life. Again, we're trying to have a broader lifespan perspective. The self-capacities deal with these adversities within these contexts. And then what is really important are the mindsets or expectations or beliefs that come out of those capacities. So you can feel that you are a sense of empowerment, a sense of optimism, a sense that you can adapt to new situations, and that you're hopeful for your future. So we're seeing a real crucial role for expectations or expectancies in terms of motivating and driving behavior. Definitions of these terms are here. You'll be familiar with activity self-efficacy because it has to do with confidence and being able to perform behaviors to reach a desired state in the future. Capacity to marshal resources, that's how we navigate and negotiate through our lives, and the physical resources, the social supports. Life situation adaptability is a little, maybe a newer concept for you, but it's the idea of adapting to change across contexts. So going from one context to another, and you can see how that's particularly relevant to transitions because you're going into a new role and into a new life situation. And they encompass things like trying harder, so, effort, but not just that, it's knowing when to give up and knowing when to leave that situation and find a new niche in which you thrive. I think that's really important. There's times where it's maladaptive to keep trying. And then the idea of envisioning a positive future, hope, as well as having a pathway to reach goals. That's a classic definition of hope. So the role of adversity. Heidi thought I should stress this, and so I came up with some quotes. Mickey Rooney, you always pass failure on your way to success. Mary Pickford, who knows who Mary Pickford is? Yay. This thing we call failure is not the falling down, but the staying down. And I think my favorite, Thomas Edison, I've not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. So you see, it's about how we view failure and adversity in our lives. It's how that we have to appreciate this. We can't protect people from adversity. Adversity and failure is how we learn. We get feedback, we learn, we change, we grow. Transactional framework, which is part of our model. I just want to show how A on that, where have I got that? The adverse health-related experience leads to self-regulatory processes that are operating as a result of transactions between these adaptive self-capacities and the context. So what we see around us, what we believe is available, the experiences that we have, and they, over time, in very complicated ways that are simplified here, lead to various adaptive benefits that have to do with not only competence, but the psychological realm, the social realm, and the idea of the future. And what I like about this model is because it feeds back into adaptive self-capacities. So through these experiences and through gaining these benefits, like there's cycles. And don't worry about the red lines, those are feedback processes that I won't go into today. Does it make sense? Why is this useful? We're coming into the disability perspective to look at adversity. It's building blocks, so it supports that kind of gradual building of capacities for resiliency. It talks about the importance of enhancing self-capacities and expectancies because these are modifiable. Okay? Rather than traits within a person, like a person being invulnerable, you can't do much about that. These are things that you can foster and encourage. Points to the role of adversity and developing adaptive self-capacities. I'm looking at Amy now, but within support, within a supportive, nurturing, coaching sorts of environment. So it's failure and strife and all that, but it's not without some assistance. And it points to the central role of expectancies, these ones about empowerment and so on. The implications for rehab, that it means preparing children with disabilities to negotiate and navigate what they're going to encounter in life. So we tend to leave that for transition programming, but this is just something we need to be thinking about all the way along. The resiliency framework, again, talks about the importance of helping children to view themselves authentically as empowered, optimistic, adaptive, and hopeful, to the degree to which that is authentic, not just to force them into that. And then I think one of the big things here is that we need to go beyond just health concerns, as Nancy and Heidi were saying. We need to go beyond issues of impairment, beyond functioning and participation, but get to the idea of adaptation. Just want to let you know where all this thinking about resiliency came from. It was developed in the context of the transition strategy. So who's aware of the transition strategy here? Okay. So that's another major initiative here where we had a big interest in pathways to positive youth outcomes. And we first published an article on pathways to adaptive development with this kind of transactional framework. And again, that simply means the person and the environment together influencing So a person influences their environment, the environment influences the person over time. And in that work, we published and proposed capacity facilitation, which is what we generally do in rehab, then a resiliency pathway, which is taking us into this work, and then a socialization pathway, which is even more higher order and has to do with roles and changing life context, even though, I mean, resiliency touches on that, but it was a separate pathway. And so the whole transactional framework was about how to provide services that can help people to develop their capacities, help them to adapt, and help them to be a part of their society on a role kind of level. Utility for Holland Bloorview, clinically and organizationally, a plea or a pitch that resiliency and adaptation should be one of our major goals of services. That we need to not only provide psychosocial services, but psychosocial approaches to services. This work ties in nicely with a solution-focused coaching and a lot of coaching models that are out there now and being used because they're empowering. It talks about the changing the clinical conversation, and as Heidi was saying, like opening a space for these kinds of conversations to occur so that people are aware of their self-capacities and they are actively involved and learning and so forth. And then again, the idea of opportunity and experiences that we provide in our participation and inclusion programs and many of our other programs, transition related programs that foster these capacities. Examples when you support the development of self-capacities by working on life skills, you can be enhancing activity, self-efficacy. Giving people opportunities to direct personal attendance is enhancing their capacity to marshal resources. Trial and error learning can help them with adaptability across different life situations. And then the idea of role models and youth facilitators, exposing people to these individuals and others can foster capacity to envision, gee, I can do that, someone else has done that. There are opportunities for me, it's not just one future, there are diverse opportunities that can lie ahead. And so now I'm with Lawrence Lamptey and Yukari Seiko and others. We're presently developing a measure of resiliency that's relevant to rehab, and it's going to be part of a CIHR grant that we're working towards to be submitted in the spring. And I have some questions for you. What is of these self-capacities that are listed at the bottom, are there any that resonate more with you than others? Anything you think we're missing? I'm really looking for input. Sean.
Yeah. This is so maybe it's something around anything missing, but sometimes if I'm facing adversity, I think I can handle it, but I can't, and I have this like not able to actually truly appreciate what I need to have in place. Does that make sense? So
yeah.
I think I'm ready for it, but I'm really not, and it's like a challenging area where I maybe almost delude myself thinking that I can handle it, but in actual fact, it's just a challenge.
Yeah, it's like I think the whole idea of like the self-regulation, and in some of our other work, we've gone right into trying to measure self-regulation. So you're sort of saying that would be something to really be focusing on here as well. Yeah, yeah, and it's how we regulate. Sometimes we think we can handle it. That's the head, right? But then, the emotions get in the way, or yeah, we don't have the kind of supports that we need as well. Yeah, good point. Yeah.
I'd be interested in understanding the connection of a caregiver and the resiliency model. So we talk about the person being resilient, but what if you have a caregiver who's a huge link in that connection who doesn't have the skills to help the child?
Yeah, no, that's a huge piece. I mean, the resiliency literature, one of the key factors is social support, and for children, it's family. There's a huge literature on the health of the family members. It's in a system, and everything impacts everything else. So yeah, that's why I think the mental health strategies are looking at that as well. You can't divorce it, the family. Yeah. Yeah, please.
I didn't hear you mention the word trust, but I think particularly for traumatic brain injury or other later things you're not born with.
Yeah.
As you were talking, I was thinking of last year's Invictus Games that I attended, and the shot put had a category for the most disabled veterans. And that category, it took about 5 minutes. They were strapped in their chair, and it took about 5 minutes for them to be secured so that they could be handed the shot put, and then they had to lean back and shoot it. And I thought, you have to put all your trust that those people strap you in properly, that you don't just topple backwards when you go to lean back there.
Yeah.
And I admired them for being able to put their trust, you know, you figure they previously had leadership roles, or at least roles where they did everything for themselves. And here they were willing to do this for shot putting. And I don't think myself I would be sure you tied everything properly and would be willing to do that, you know? So is there a, built in that activity, self-efficacy? Is the shot put there, I mean, is the self-confidence, the trust of who is supporting you?
Yeah, absolutely. That activity, self-efficacy, is usually about confidence, but I think it relates to all of these things. You've got to have trust that there are other people who will support you in life, right? Yeah.
How about culture? How does culture and ethnicity really
Yeah.
play into all of these things?
Yeah.
Because when we look at culture, when we look at, you know, we're a very diverse place, and how do we all culturally look at all of these things and respect each other in the realm of everything that we do here, as well as respect each other in terms of how we practice healthcare, and making sure that we also are not stepping on each other's toes by, you know, trying to ensure that, you know, clients and families feel that whatever they're practicing or feel is necessary is being respected as well.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that's largely like Michael Ungar's part about looking at the culture and what is appropriate in the culture. And I don't think these are things that every person may want to have. These are self-capacities that may pertain to some people, may pertain to one culture more than the other. There's a whole, to look at the cultural appropriateness and sensitivity is a really good point. As we go forward in developing items in particular, I think we have to somehow bring that in about respecting diversity. Yes, Shannon.
I think when I'm thinking about the area, especially if we're talking about brain injury, a lot of these skills have a lot of metacognitive component,
Yes.
higher level thinking, really leaning on these kind of cognitive reserves. And sometimes those change after brain injury.
Yes.
Sometimes kids have a really hard time and have a different cognitive profile now and really can't do some of this future thinking and far-reaching stuff. It's hard for them.
Yes.
That reserve isn't there. So how do we adapt that model? I'm not saying that these kids don't have this ability and shouldn't be included in this, but sometimes we look at these models and think these don't represent the kids that we're seeing, especially early on in recovery. So how do we have a model that maybe
Be
transitions
relevant,
to that?
yeah.
Yeah, and for kids that don't have the same cognitive capacity.
So I presented this work at March of Dimes, and you know they were like, "Oh, this is relevant," but I think it's all in how the items are, the level of the items, the cognitive understanding that's required, you know, and we're looking at sort of a cognitive level of reading ability. All of that kind of stuff was really important here as well. Heidi and Nancy, did you want to keep going with other questions? Yeah, so I'm inviting interest. Like if people are interested to help with the items or vet items or critique items, I would be very happy. I'm right in the midst of that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Gillian. That I always learn so much when I listen to Gillian talk. So we had some questions that we wanted to pose to you, sort of slipping back to the mental health information that we presented to you earlier. We wanted to hear from you about, is there information that we presented, was it new? Does it excite you? Does it resonate with you? Although that's not my favorite word. But what that we said today sort of sticks.
Or is there something else you'd like to know as well?